So I can't make the lecture today, so I'm recording a video and you can watch it in class if opportunity presents. I'm really sorry to miss the session. I was really looking forward to it. It sounded like it'd be a really fun one and a good way to explore our practice. It seemed quite curiously open with regards to whether we should be talking about our recent practice and its objects which stand for that practice or serve to generate our thinking around it or to anchor it, or whether we were are being provoked to talk about our practice in a larger sense and the kind of longer or larger histories um, which the objects thereof provoke. So I've kind of gone for a bit of in between. Um, We've got a painting here I made last year, late last year, as I was beginning to work on and think about the independent studies module. I've got also a picture from a school that I worked at in 2019 and 18, I believe. This is from a student. It's one of the members of my art club that who I asked for voluntary homework from, and that could be anything of any size, and that's what they gave me. And there is an explanation for it, but we'll go into that. This is a kind of remnant of a processual work related to the independent studies, and I'll go into that. And then this is a kind of reference point for my thinking about art in general, and a certain relationship between art and philosophy that is open-ended um, and generative. Um, so they are presented in an order, not necessarily in, not purposefully, but they are in an order, and we'll go between them like this. Blah, blah, blah. So let's start with Beckett. Why not? I studied art history, and I ended up writing about Samuel Beckett as one of the most interesting kind of things that I had come across, not particularly on the course, but through a friend, and then trying to fit this into BA assessment criteria for the history of art, design, architecture, and film at Kingston, where I studied. Um, I looked into his film work predominantly, and some of his video works from the 80s, or they 70s, trying, as I was asked, to focus on the visual elements of his work or the visual type of output as opposed to literature. But this book was particularly interesting. But this book, this reference point, kind of stands for the Beckett's oeuvre more generally, which has a really interesting relationship to philosophy, I find. It seems to be readable in terms of a lot of different philosophies and thinkers, but in such a way to never properly resolve. And therefore, there are kind of competing philosophical viewpoints of certain texts, such as, for example, or competing readings of by different philosophers whose works kind of go in similar but different directions. I guess in the 20th century you have and late 20th century you have Gilles Deleuze, who talks a lot about exhaustion, and Beckett's writing, particularly this text actually, and the different approaches to exploring the potentials of language, and that kind of did. I looked into that for quite a while, and that served to bolster an interest in language and serve a reflection on the relationship between philosophy and literature and art more generally, via language, I suppose, and what can be done in different uses of language, particularly in artistic or creative works. And then you can counterpose that to the work of Alain Badiou, who offers quite a persuasive reading of the entirety of Beckett's oeuvre, in a sometimes seemingly reductive way, kind of indicating a certain progression from earlier florid and verbose and, we might say, baroque uses of language, perhaps. Maybe that's not the right word, but a certain kind of wildness and slipperiness of language towards his later work, which is more sparse, more kind of punctuated, less literally less punctuated. In which in certain, I think I forget what the name of the text, but paragraphs start to be separated as if each being a single breath, where the slipperiness of language then turns into something more, attempting to rest, perhaps once and for all. I think this is perhaps like the difficulty of speaking about Beckett and speaking about philosophy, that it demands a certain kind of engagement and perhaps kind of a writing, even like a way to put down a certain interpretation of meaning and to pin that down, and how Beckett really kind of eludes that possibility sometimes. And I wrote about this in my MA in philosophy of art and aesthetics and art theory, as a continuation of my exploration of that relationship through the work of Beckett. So I found him really useful for a number of reasons. And then overall, really, I just really enjoy it. It's very funny, and I think that's a large component of my thinking around art and specifically around teaching. That it must be fun, not necessarily always, but that there's a real value in humour. Let's just say that. And so we can move on to this, if we're thinking chronologically. Running a bunch of art clubs in primary schools, kind of as a TA and as something voluntary, helped me to generate a passion for teaching, coming out of a few years teaching English language in a kind of problematic context in Gulf Arabia, where you're working in quite close proximity to kind of the suffering of a lot of people. You think of Yemen, or you think of the indentured labourers working in these countries that I worked in and that I benefited from financially. It was quite a difficult place to be, so it was nice to go from that to come back to London and work in some schools with kids. And I found working in a kind of having the freedom to deliver my own lessons of my own design were really useful. But at the same time, I was very conscious of and aware of the curriculum in the schools that I worked, and tried to complement learning with the art curriculum, as well as that with learning more generally. And I guess this object speaks to that. I presume this. So this child gave this to me as one of the voluntary homeworks that I'd requested, if they wish, to give to me. And yeah, he didn't really explain it. The only explanation he gave of this picture was that it's a meeting of land, sea, and kind of ocean sea, or land water and sea water. And I forget actually the words he used, but I guess it's probably a reflection or part of a lesson, part of a geography lesson probably, in the class that he was in. I think he was a year 4 student. But I thought it was a really clever way to kind of visualize the meeting of two different bodies of water, one which kind of comes from the land and one which comes from somewhere else. The text is quite interesting. I don't know if it says air, CVR, or what that is, but I thought it was really beguiling and really beautiful. And there were many incidents like this of the unexpected in these art clubs I did, which really, I suppose, helped me to notice and think about what can happen when there is no obligation, when you just I offer a possibility for something without any consequences of assessment, any consequences of expectation. And a few times things like this happened, which were really useful, and I won't go into them here. But it seemed like
student behaviors and varieties of abilities, like really didn't indicate the results that I got from these students, and that the value of these sessions was quite eventful in that they were related to our meeting and our encounter in these sessions. That was sometimes by chance, and yeah, were really fun for me and I think for the kids. But anyway, next, chronologically speaking, we have this.
Wow, so this is hard. I had to stop because I was stooping over and I was finding it hard to breathe and talk at the same time, which I guess refers us back to Beckett and the later kind of paragraphs representing breaths as a relationship between speech and the body, or language and the body. And I guess that makes sense in relation to this picture as a certain kind of representation, I suppose you could call it, of, or albeit a slippery one, of my kind of engagement or with Deleuze's thinking, particularly the rhizome, and this idea of philosophy as a labyrinth in which you kind of work your way out from the middle. Ariadne's thread, without really a beginning or end, just a ball. But at the same time, this kind of marks the engagement with materials that are to hand. And I guess there's a certain kind of gathering that's common to both my kind of art practice and teaching practice, or how I'm trying to identify my teaching practice. You can refer to this as a kind of collecting of student work, which I often do, and I'm trying to be more active in combining materials of my own and as well as students making in single objects. For instance, there's a thing here which I did this week. I just made a quick sketchbook to take in my pocket to work as a TA at the autism school, and just collecting bits of things that students are doing, cutting paper, for instance, or cutting card, and sitting with them and sticking it down. And I did some drawing, I suppose you could call it, with another child who seemed to like drawing straight lines over and over so that it goes all the way through the paper, which is pretty cool. So yeah, and yeah, so this ball of thread was lying around as I'd been trying to use an unfamiliar material and a more tactile kind of, I suppose, sensory one, which funnily enough before I started working with autistic students who engage a lot in very sensory ways. It was weird how this bit of red was just a bit of red thread had kind of found its way into the middle of this green ball, and I thought that was kind of intriguing, so I chose to paint it. And that it is what it is, a picture of some green wool with some red wool inside. This is a glove. I got some very cheap gloves from a shopping centre nearby, that I really liked. I lost one of the gloves, and this is the one I had left over. And after I started working with these autistic students, who, as Alba will testify, are they're very tactile, and they explore with their hands and with their senses, with their tastes and all sorts, very directly. And so I guess I was thinking about that, and I actually tried to paint by filling the fingers of this glove with different colors of paints, and putting my hand into the glove and then trying to push the paint through the fibers of the glove onto a canvas. I do have a picture of that. I do have that painting somewhere. But I found the object itself, after it dried, more interesting, really. Quite a nice kind of, as it has a certain solidity. I guess it kind of stands in my thinking as a kind of byproduct of a process. And this relates to exploring the work of Erin Manning, who talks about autism and autistics and how they make the
the boundary between process and object felt. And so I guess this is something I made as a kind of reflection or articulation of how I was trying to think through these things via material. And I found this object as a byproduct of the process more interesting than the painting that was produced as a result. I guess we can think about process in relation to the voluntary homeworks I set, and my thinking and reflecting on the art clubs that I ran in primary schools, often where in kind of crit stages, feedback stages at the end of art lessons, or art club lessons, we would talk about our work and present them. And I thought it was really interesting how some students kind of presented a little narrative, a little story of what they'd made. Like, for example, we drew from the fish tank in the hallway, the fish, and one of the students who'd been brought to the art club as a naughty boy, it was kind of quietly worded to me that he can be quite a handful, and he was an absolute angel and darling in the lesson. He presented his story of the fish that he'd drawn. It seemed as a kind of story of himself, a naughty fish who was misunderstood and just wanted friends, and that was just really lovely. And yeah, he seemed really adept in like kind of constructing a story as a relationship between himself and this picture that he'd made, and that was really moving and constructive and productive for myself as much as I hope it was for him in our brief interaction. So I guess there's a certain kind of narrative thread that I see contained in pictorial frames, representational or not. And I guess that's something that's quite interesting that could be undone a bit more. The space of representation in relation to meaning. And yeah, I'll probably leave it there. I could go on forever, obviously, like unraveling and tying up and going between and going around. But it's been a very tiring day. I went to the woods with a class of children, and that was a lot of excitement for everyone involved. I'm sorry I can't be there tomorrow or today, and I hope it goes very well, and I would like to hear all about it when I see you next. Yeah, take care and goodbye.